Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Flywheel, your number one source for everything Frax, DeFi, and everything in between. If you want to know what's going on in the world on chain, you've come to the right place. This is DeFi Dave here with capital K, and we are here to help you harness the power of the flywheel. We have balloons, we have cherry blossoms, we have it all this episode because we have on Rune. We have on Rune from MakerDAO. We're going deep into the legend himself. And we go deep into SubDAOs this episode, where he's trying to introduce a new meta in his own words of, how do we incentivize or human beings and organize them in a manner that isn't, that doesn't just turn into an insider click, just, extracting all the value and funds. And how do we do that in a sustainable manner? And how can we get a more fluid system of contributors going instead of an ossified group of insiders? And I think that's really the points of this episode and the main problem that Rune and his endgame proposal is trying to tackle. And we go deep. And Kit, what are your thoughts on this one?
Dave, I normally don't really like these touchy-feely kind of pods, but this is one of the few where I'm I gotta pay attention because this is experimentation on a grand scale.
Yeah.
So this was worth it.
Yeah. And he introduces this new concept called alignment engineering. And it's just how do we, get all the components together in order for a DAO, for a protocol to continue perpetually, but doesn't get crowded with insiders and whatnot. And I think that's really, he goes into the definition of alignment engineering and all that fun stuff and everything in between. So make sure you pay attention to this episode, because I feel if SubDAOs work out, then this is an episode that people are gonna go back to. But if it doesn't work out, people are gonna still go back to it and be hey, what went wrong? So I'm really excited for this episode. Rune, thank you so much for coming on. And to make sure to catch all the episodes of Flywheel, you hit that bell button and subscribe to our YouTube. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Give us a like. Show us your support. Make sure to follow us on all our socials at Flywheel DeFi on Twitter, TikTok, and Telegram. If you want exclusive show notes, go down to our FrxETH for exclusive summaries and show notes. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter on our website, flywheeldefi.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at DeFiDave22.
You can follow me at 0x_K.
And let's get the flywheel spinning.
ਦਿਲ ਪਰਦੇਸੀ ਨੂੰ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਨਿਤਜ਼ਾਰ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਨਾਲ ਰੰਜੇਟੇ ਜੋਗੀ ਦੇ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਜੋਗਣ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਇਸ਼ਕ ਦੇ ਅਲਿਆ ਜ਼ਖਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਖੁਦ ਹੱਸ ਕੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਸੀ ਲਾਂਗੀ ਜੇ ਯਾਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਮੈਂ ਘਟ ਘਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਪੀ ਲਾਂਗੀ
Do you hold ETH but don't know what to do with it? Want to earn those juicy liquid staking derivative yields but don't know where to start? Well, FrxETH is there for you. FrxETH is Frax's native LSD solution, allowing you to earn boosted yields in multiple ways on your ETH. If you want to get started, go to app.frax.finance and turn your ETH into FrxETH today. All right, everyone, welcome back to this special episode of Flywheel. I'm your host, DeFi Dave, here with capital K, and this time around we have a very special guest. We go across the chain to our friend Rune, the founder of MakerDAO. He needs no introduction, and he has a lot of big plans, especially with SubDAOs, which we're really going to get into here. Rune, thank you so much for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Getting into it, since, for the past few months, we've been hearing about Endgame and specifically about SubDAOs, and it's caused a lot of conversation. And I just want to really focus on that this episode and see how they play out into the future. So for those that are unfamiliar, what is your definition of SubDAOs and how do you see it playing into the Endgame plan and whatnot?
Yeah, so I'm sure that there probably isn't one single definition of SubDAOs in general, although it definitely is a general trend. The basic mentality, the basic approach to what it is that's driving what we're doing in Maker with SubDAOs, and then what others are doing, right? And really fundamentally, I would say it's a method that enables scaling in DAOs by essentially subdividing sort of areas of concern, complexity into multiple smaller chunks, which gives a lot of there's a lot of really good advantages with this. And I think the really basic thing you can think about is what a lot of people say when first people get into DAOs and then they're like all utopian about it. And then very quickly they see that mostly it's a shit show, right? Most of the time it's terrible. It's just so disappointing for a lot of people to really get into DAOs, right? And often the reaction is, look, it was fine when it was small, and then as soon as it gets big, it becomes terrible. And SubDAOs are kind of like, it's not by itself, it's obviously not a silver bullet, but it's a pretty effective tool that just simply achieves this of like, what if we could just keep the DAO small, right? So the sort of the overall ecosystem can grow, but if you have this ability to subdivide yourself into SubDAOs, then one of these negative dynamics of it gets worse when it gets bigger can be kind of held at bay. But of course, there's so many more advantages and some more aspects to it, right? There's specialization, right? So you can have a DAO that can do many different things because each SubDAO really only has one thing it focuses on, so it doesn't get super confused or distracted. There is one of the things I'm really excited about to test out in Maker, right, is like saying of like sort of the vibes, right? The community culture that you can have a single ecosystem with SubDAOs that are very kind of serious and others that are very playful and more like social clubs really than, financial organizations, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so, in conclusion, overall, more than anything else, because of the stage we're at in crypto and in DeFi and with DAOs, we still don't know what really works, right? And so what SubDAOs are, more than anything else, really for sure going to do is facilitate a lot of experimentation. In Maker, often, one of the things that are really, I often describe as a really, like the superpower of SubDAOs in Maker is that they can fail, they can die. The problem with Maker is it's this big, really structurally important bureaucratic machine, right? And it has so much process and so much bureaucracy that's all based around this fact that it simply cannot fail, and it can't even like get close to failing, and that holds it back a lot for very good reasons, right? And with SubDAOs, it's the opposite. Like they're sort of designed around when they fail, it's fine. And you just keep making more of them. So you actually want them to fail kind of because you want them to actually take the kind of risks and do the kind of experiments that could put them in danger of failing, because that's how you really can innovate a lot, and that's how you can learn new things. And then the next generation can learn both from the successes, but then actually also maybe just as importantly from the failures, right? And learn what not to do.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a natural equilibrium with DAOs. And you're talking about that on the last podcast you had. Like, they'll naturally over time, the amount of SubDAOs that will be in a certain ecosystem will reach a point where it's just balanced. And sometimes maybe it's just like, we don't know what that number is for Maker. Maybe it's like a few, maybe it's 10, who knows? But the point of SubDAOs, it sounds like it allows for experimentation in ways that just having one monolithic main DAO wouldn't have, because as the main DAO scales over time, it becomes bureaucratic, there's politics, there's infighting. But in a way, these SubDAOs also formalize the debates and clashes that would happen. Instead of everything happening for like everything take all in one main DAO, there's all these different separate SubDAOs, fight like in competition, but in competition in a constructive manner.
Yeah, totally. There's this sort of, I guess there's an aspect to what you're talking about here, right? Of this thing of like the conflicts, the politics of DAOs that are definitely very interesting with SubDAOs, and also some of the other constructs we use in Maker. So SubDAOs is one of them, but we also use this same idea in other cases, and that is this idea that overall, I've just learned from my time in crypto that humans are super difficult to deal with, right? And you sort of come into crypto with this like idealistic view of you just need to write some code and then it's all going to be utopia. But the reality is it's so much harder to deal with humans because they do some terrible things, basically, or they act in really stupid ways. And one thing that always happens is this stuff with like personal conflict, personal sort of enmity. Like you'll just have people in social groups, social structures, social hierarchies, and some of them will just not like, does not like each other, and it's kind of a self-reinforcing thing because you use it to sort of establish, you define yourself in opposition to something else. So it's just total natural human behavior that you get these tribes, cliques, and I mean we see it everywhere in crypto even, right? It's kind of embarrassing, honestly, right? That it's crypto is really it's no different than PlayStation versus Xbox, right? With a bunch of nerds fighting over what their favorite blockchain technology is, right? But this is simply human nature. And so to your point, right, is that another thing that SubDAOs achieve is that we kind of accept, we don't gloss over this and sort of pretend that humans are better than they are, in a sense, right? We actually sort of try to meet this kind of natural dynamic and make it more constructive, right? I mean, it's a lot more fun to be tribalistic and be sort of enemies in a video game, right? That's sort of designed to be competitive, and there's a level playing field and there are rules, and like that's actually fun, right? Whereas it's super, super frustrating if it's in like a freaking office, right? And you're like playing office politics with some other corporate types, right? So SubDAOs is kind of us attempting also to make it feel less like a corporate office and super depressing, and actually more like, okay, there's going to be groups that want to compete. So let's give them some fair rules. Let's give them some structure. Let's give them some boundaries so they don't go out of bounds and start, sort of just racing to the bottom and kind of self-destructing the whole thing. But instead, actually, let's channel that competitive drive and that tribalistic instinct towards one-upping each other, right? And out-competing, out-growing, out-marketing, and through that, then actually benefiting the whole ecosystem. So, which then also means, because of the nature of SubDAOs, right? All SubDAOs are connected to the main DAO, right? The core DAO. As a result, if two SubDAOs compete with each other and one totally owns the other one and just has massive success, I mean, actually, the sort of the loser in this situation will also benefit, right? Because the main DAO is going to benefit from the upside of one SubDAO is going to flow to the core DAO, which then flows to the other SubDAO. But of course, to a lesser extent, right? I mean, because you need to credit where it's due, right? It needs to be those who actually do the work that gets the vast majority of the benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like everything you're saying here is a part of something you mentioned called alignment engineering, and a way to bring constructive participation to ecosystems. So is that true? And on top of that, what is your definition of alignment engineering and how it relates to DAOs and SubDAOs?
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, it's exactly this thought of aligning incentives between people, right? So, I mean, alignment engineering is it's just a term I made up to describe what in the real world people usually call organizational design, right? So organizational design is like a very it's an established field, and you have a lot of like gurus and a lot of thought leaders in this field. And like the thing about it is that when we think about DAOs is that they're a bit different from normal organizations because of their radical transparency, which does result in my opinion, a bit like there's a bit more the kind of the issues with humans and the kind of the bad habits of humans tend to show up more and be a little bit more difficult to deal with in a DAO compared to a regular organization, because basically you don't in a normal organization you do always have the boss that can just sort of fix things, right? In a DAO, the kind of the overarching politics and the overarching sort of social and political dynamic of a DAO is actually more reminiscent of like a democracy in national politics, because it's all public, right? Like instead of having the boss, you got this court of public opinion that very often is kind of a very major factor. So to handle that, I mean, you just need to be very like that. What it just means is that you need to you really need to to the extent you can engineer like soft and hard mechanisms that try to basically push people towards doing stuff that's aligned, so things that are good and that benefit the DAO as a whole, versus what they sort of, what most people are really trying to do, which is just do whatever benefits themselves. Like you want to sort of align those two things, right? You want to make it so that even if you're an asshole that doesn't give a shit about anybody, the best course of action should be to do something that benefits the DAO, because that's how you're going to get paid or something like that, right? And you really want to build that to the extent possible into kind of the mechanisms of the DAO, right? You don't want to, I don't know, tell someone an inspirational slogan and then hope that that's going to convince them, right? You want to sort of make it very much, let's engineer a mechanism that tries to achieve this alignment, right? And so, okay, so the simplest example of this, right? I mean, that is used all the time in the real world is something like, stock options in a startup or something like that, right? I mean, that's a perfect basic example of what I would call like alignment engineering, right? Of you give people some stock, so now they have an ownership, now they got an upside. So they're not, I mean, primarily the employees, but of course they also, now they're also a little bit like the owners. So now they should be a little bit more aligned with the owners, right? And so in a like, what I mean, the biggest and most important sort of alignment engineering, how to call it, approach or like plan, basically
strategy,
with Maker and the SubDAOs is this thing then of, do you have a different token for each SubDAO, right? So you have a bunch of SubDAOs, they all have their own tokens. And then all of these SubDAOs, as they work with contributors who are working for those SubDAOs, who are getting paid to do stuff, right? To market the SubDAO, to build new features for it, then you can pay them in those tokens. And so what you're doing is you're creating this very sort of tight feedback loop, right? Where if you think about and this is what happened in Maker, right? Is so you have this giant DAO with a huge amount of contributors. And everybody was getting, so we were using this, like the basic alignment engineering trick of give everybody some tokens, because that's going to make them token holders. So that's going to get them a little bit aligned. But the problem was just that the DAO is just so big that you don't really care about your tokens if you're just like a drop in the pond, right? Like ultimately what, the impact that, a single team would have on Maker, didn't really matter that much, and you wouldn't be able to like sort of, I don't know what to call it, right? You wouldn't be able to feel it in your token holdings if you screwed up or you did a really good job the vast majority of times, right? Because it's just too big. And so with the SubDAOs, by sort of chopping it up into small pieces, suddenly it's like, well, maybe you hold several % of the SubDAOs tokens now, and you're a single contributor, and it's really like if you make some like a breakthrough new product that's gonna really, allow the SubDAO to onboard a lot of new users that nobody else can get to or something like that. I mean, that could really have a much bigger upside for you than your, the cash compensation you're getting for doing that work, right? So now suddenly there's this more like, you're sort of, you're putting that skin in the game, and you're letting people think more. You're trying to eliminate this sort of robotic thinking of, I need to do whatever the system wants me to do so I get paid. And you start to instead think like, what can I do so that I create value for the system, because I own a part of the system. And if I create value for the system, I'm going to get some of that value for myself, right? And that's, if you can harness that in people, that's a real superpower, right? Because that's kind of the fact that the principal agent problem, this kind of disconnect between what people are supposed to do and then what they actually do, that is like the bane of every single organization, basically.
Yeah, this actually leads to my next question very well. With why do SubDAO tokens need to exist? How do they accrue value over time in a long-term sustainable manner? Because so many times you see like different organizations, they spin out a token in an ecosystem, but it's kind of flat. So how do you ensure that the token is actually valuable and worth something? It's not just a token to release a token.
Yeah. So the great thing about Maker, really, what sets us apart from everyone else is that we are one of the only projects that have always just been focused on generating value first, right? And no messing around, right? Like there's no there's no like equity or company or something behind it, right? Like it's only always been everything that the Maker project has focused on has always just been to develop a valuable ecosystem and a valuable network, and then have that network able to govern itself and capture the value itself through the token and through the community that holds this token, right? And the way the value is generated is ultimately through the delivery of real value to the end user, right? Through the ability to have a stable coin, and then also the ability to get the yield from the stable coin, right? And so, I mean, that's what we're trying to then scale up with the SubDAOs, right? This basic ability to generate real value for end users, and then essentially take a cut of that value for the I guess you could say the service of delivering that to the end user, right? So there's actually, I mean, there are a lot of ways to generate value in crypto. There's also a lot of ways that people thought they could create value, and it turns out they couldn't, right? So the potential and like the universe of possibilities in crypto and in DeFi is definitely a lot smaller than people were imagining, let's say in the last bubble or something like that, right? And I think at this point it's pretty clear that the absolute, dominant and by far the best business model of all is just the basic stablecoin model, right? So basically the idea is then that, so the ecosystem the core DAO, right? The Maker core focuses simply on creating this very basic stablecoin functionality, right? And then, and this is a key feature of this endgame structure, right, with SubDAOs and the core DAO, is that the core DAO really only does very little, and it very specifically is maintaining this stablecoin product, and then it is creating and regulating the SubDAOs and nothing else. So it simply cannot change. Like it can't create a new product or pivot or do something. That's totally impossible for it. It can only let all of that happen through the SubDAOs, right? So it's basically sort of saying, look, we're all sharing the cornerstone of this very powerful basic business model, which is a stable coin. But then everything you want to build on top of that, that's going to be essentially left open for the SubDAOs to build and generate value from. And so, I typically sort of split up the business models, the different opportunities for SubDAOs into, you could say, 3 different categories, right? So the first one is just the really, really basic user growth, user acquisition, marketing, essentially. And that is like the most basic functionality of SubDAOs. So that also goes back to the thing I was talking about at the beginning of like culture and vibes, and like what that also very much means is brand. That SubDAOs, more than anything else, they're always focused on trying to create a distinct brand that targets a distinct demographic, that then allows them to build a user base and a coherent community, and try to get that into like a flywheel of basically an active user base that uses the product, right? And the most basic product that they provide is always the stablecoin product, right? So the core DAO has a stablecoin, and the SubDAO has essentially the front end to the stablecoin. And then the most basic thing the SubDAO tries to do is to try to attract people to use the stablecoin. And then, I guess you could say as alignment engineering, or more like as just like completely standard business, right? There is this system called the accessibility reward, basically. So what that means is the core DAO tracks which SubDAOs are attracting users to the stablecoin, and then basically gives them a bit of, like a little cut, essentially. So kind of like paying for paying for bringing in users, right? And so that is like, I mean, that business model alone is actually enough to sort of justify the existence of a SubDAO, really. In theory, you could have a SubDAO that only does that and then has no expenses and just tries to bring in users to like a decentralized front end that is simple and just is like, it's a stable coin. It does what you expect it to, right?
And so what KPIs would be used for user acquisition, you think?
Well, so it is entirely the DAI supply, right? You're trying to grow the stablecoin supply, right? That's the key product. That's everything you're looking at, right? And I mean, okay, and there's a whole extra aspect to this, which is that, so of course, now Maker is really popular and is like one of the only projects in crypto that's growing, right? And that's because the DAO basically, so first sort of paved the way on the regulatory front by, blocking Americans and various other jurisdictions. Right. And then when that was done, then it was the DAI savings rate, the yield you can get from holding DAI was then set to 5%, right? So now you can get a really good yield, a really attractive yield from using DAI today. And this ability to get a yield it's not just stability, it's also a yield, but it's a stable, safe yield, right? That's a big kind of value add to the basic stablecoin model, right? But where we really want to go is we want to get a lot more creative about how can we actually attract people into crypto? How can we appeal to get more people to use it, right? And that's where we're basically looking at things like DeFi Summer, right? Where you saw, what is it people think is funny about crypto and DeFi? Well, they like yield farming, right? It's actually a pretty cool innovation that you can give people yield in something more than just a boring cash. You can give people yield in volatile tokens, right? And what that's doing is just sort of gamifying the experience of saving money. Of course, in practice, DeFi Summer, the problem was then most of it was Ponzi's, right? So it wasn't really saving. It was like a false promise, right? It didn't really do what it could have done, something amazing, but it didn't really end up doing it. But now we're trying to sort of deliver the true potential of that. And the way it all comes together is because the SubDAOs themselves, right? They all have their own tokens. And all of these tokens are then distributed through yield farming to the holders of the stablecoin, right? So that's what very often people will come to SubDAOs specifically for the reason of farming the tokens of the SubDAOs, right? And again, this is just the absolute basic product of we're just providing access to this very, very basic but very powerful and solid business model of a stablecoin. And already that by itself is creating real value and is giving the SubDAOs basically a reason to exist and a real sort of economic ability to sustain themselves, because if they bring in users, then they get this accessibility reward, and that allows them to then pay contributors to, return value to the token holders, and innovate and experiment with new stuff. And so that's driving demand. Then there is driving supply, you could say. So that is this much more complex challenge of deploying the collateral for the stablecoin, right? So the other side of a stablecoin business is so people are coming with their money and sort of saying, I would like the DAO to keep my capital safe and stable. Then the DAO has to figure out, well, how to allocate this capital out to actually make it safe and stable, right? And nowadays in Maker, and I think, basically all stablecoins that have really scaled, this is all based on deploying into real-world assets, or you talk about centralized stablecoins that are just entirely based on the financial system, right? So it's a case of deploying capital out into the financial system, into things like treasuries and other safe assets, basically in safe jurisdictions with good legal structures. But also it can be like deploying it into something like a protocol like Aave, or of course like Spark protocol, which is one of the SubDAOs as well, that does this native crypto lending. But anyway, so the SubDAOs fit into this in this basic model where the idea is that the core shouldn't be spending too much time or too much energy in this. Instead, it sort of outsources it to the SubDAOs. So Maker Core basically stops entirely doing kind of giving sort of retail end users the ability to generate DAI, and instead entirely lets this ability sit with the SubDAOs. So the SubDAOs are the only ones who can generate DAI. And then in turn, the SubDAOs can go out and they can generate DAI, access DAI from Maker, and then they can lend out this DAI to end users in all sorts of ways, right? So they can be a lot more flexible and fast in how they provide access to this credit, essentially, this capital allocation. And then beyond that, I mean, so these two, so they're driving the demand or sort of managing and deploying the supply are the two business models that are very closely tied to Maker Core itself and the possibilities that exist when you have a big established stablecoin, which is the case with Maker. But the last possibility is simply also that SubDAOs can also do anything else they feel like doing. So they can also do completely separate business models, right? They can look at what's the hot new thing in the space, and they can try to copy that or make a variation of it, or they can like invent their own completely new things, right? They can, I don't know, do NFTs, derivatives, platforms or something, front ends that actually provide access to other protocols, not just Maker Core, but also anything else. Really just whatever is going to make them money, right? But the key driver is, I mean, they're small, they have small teams and they have limited resources. So they've got to be smart about what they do, right? I mean, they can't just do a bunch of moonshots and then waste all the money. I mean, if they do that, then they simply run out of money and possibly fail, right? And then that, so that creates this illusionary pressure I was talking about where like basically like we'll see what works essentially, right? We can't know in advance, and we're creating a kind of an environment where, I mean, the market and the market participants themselves can try to figure it out.
Got it. And Rune, just to summarize, you said there are effectively 3 types of SubDAOs. The first one being very basic, targeting in growth and user acquisition. Second one being a bit more hands-on with the collateral. And third is almost this blank canvas. As a startup, you could do anything you want with the business. You can chase whatever moonshot or whatever is the flavor of the month. Those are effectively the 3 SubDAO types. Is that accurate to say?
So it's actually not 3 different types, so that as a SubDAO, you have to pick one of the 3 types. Rather, these are the 3 broad spaces of opportunity that exist for every SubDAO. So the only type of business model that every SubDAO has to do is the first one, to try to drive demand, because they're nothing without the community. So they have to build a community, they have to build a user base. And if they can't do that, then they will wither and die, basically. But whether they want to go beyond that and try to also make a business out of deploying collateral or developing new products, that's then, that's up to the SubDAO. That's up to the token holders, right? And of the 4 initial SubDAOs that we are bootstrapping, we're trying to kind of give them this initial momentum that differentiates each of them, so that they each are kind of focusing on different aspects of this, right? So some are more focused on demand, some are more focused on supply, and some are more focused on the innovation that goes completely beyond any of this. So that in the end, we'll see what works in each category, and then future additional SubDAOs that are created can then build on top of that.
Understood. And just another question: if it's so much more better with better upside working at a SubDAO, who would opt to work at the core DAO?
So actually, this is another really. I'm so excited to kind of tackle this problem of contributors in DAOs, which I think today is horribly broken, basically, because you have this like really bad model of a bunch of insiders that are kind of sort of like full-time employees or something, and they have this. I mean, often they've got a kind of a political stranglehold because the way the DAO works is just it's like a tap, and then if you open the tap, it just spills out money, and then it's like Game of Thrones, like who controls the tap of free money, right? And so what I really want to achieve is like, I think it's complete. You shouldn't, a DAO, just the contributors to a DAO isn't the DAO. Like the DAO is the community, the token holders, and the contributors are actually somewhat like separate, but that's really not, today it's kind of the opposite, right? Like the way a DAO works most of the time now is the contributors, they sort of sit, they got the money tap, and then they sort of got the call, and they got the insider Telegram groups or whatever they got. And then the token holders are like standing in a circle and complaining and bitching, right? But they don't know what to do. And they also sort of, they got like a victim mentality, right? And expect the core team right. There's this sort of apathetic attitude as well from token holders, right? That they actually don't really want to solve the problems themselves. They do expect they complain about the core teams being centralized, but they don't actually take any action themselves to change that, right? So what we try, and we need to achieve this dynamic both in Maker Core and in the SubDAOs, right? It's a dynamic where, first of all, the token holders are just more sort of put front and center as they have to actually run the thing. Like you can't, because of the basic concept of the principal agent problem, right? That like you can't, if you hire somebody to do something for you, like the reality is they'll do whatever's best for themselves, which may be doing something that's going to get them paid, but like you can never substitute somebody else for your own interest, especially when it's like a really important thing, right? Where a lot of stuff is at stake. So like as a DAO cannot exist unless its token holders, its community are actively involved in its operation, right? And understand how it works, and also have that access. That's another problem, right? That today you don't even know, even if you wanted to understand how DAO works, you wouldn't be able to, because it's all like arcane and hidden away. And we're solving that through various methods, right? Of making it simpler, and especially making it a lot more transparent and a lot more accessible. And if you can achieve this, you can put kind of the community in the center rather than the contributors in the center. Then what that means is now the contributors are in a completely different world where it's not like the DAO is no longer defined by its contributors. And that means as sort of like almost like a commodification of contribution, right? In the sense that a contributor is not a political agent that runs the show, right? A contributor is somebody who gets paid to do something specific, right? Anyway, so where I'm going with all this, right, is that what this means now is a contributor does not have to be, totally locked to a single DAO. In fact, you really want the opposite. You really want a very liquid, open marketplace, right, where contributors, they contribute all over the place. Like if you're a DAO, you want something done, you want to just hire the best to do that job. And if you're a contributor, you also you want to work for whichever can give you the best work that's available to you right now. Traditionally, that's not how the dynamic exists in a DAO, right? It's like whoever's in the DAO, they'll just try to whatever work exists, they'll try to find a way for them to do it, right? Because they don't have an alternative, right? And the DAO doesn't, it's so scary and risky to get new contributors in, because as soon as they're in, you can't get them out again, that they don't want to work with new contributors either, right? Mm-hmm. And in this paradigm where the community is at the center and contributors are kind of managed and somewhat detached from the central control of the DAO, you can really have, you can basically, it's like a drive-by thing kind of, right? Where like there's a project, contributor comes, they do the project, and they get paid, and it's over. And if they did it well, then maybe they'll do another project. Or in fact, some other SubDAO will come and be like, wow, that was great what you did for those guys. We'll pay you double if you do this other thing. And you can get this competitive dynamic on both sides, right? So you're
basically creating this, yeah.
Just to answer the question about why would someone work for the core or for the SubDAO, right? So the answer is, in this kind of liquid market, basically, it's going to be it's a matter of finding the right compensation that's going to get people to want to do work, right? So if the core is needs something done and nobody wants to do the job, because they're all working for SubDAOs, and the SubDAOs are paying them in tokens, and they want to get tokens. I mean, then what the core has to do is has to pay a higher cash rate, right? And then just like pay a lot of cash to get the work done. And also ideally, I mean, in all cases, the core ideally does not want to do much work, right? I mean, also because, it will be expensive, right? Because it'll only pay in cash. It won't pay in tokens. And the people who are willing to bid and sort of attempt to be considered to do those projects typically are people in the crypto space that are often interested in tokens. But also, I mean, there's also like family people that want cash. You know, I mean, that it's a thing that people like to get paid cash. So I'm sure there will be contributors as well. Yeah. For the call. They're
just not anons behind anime pictures.
Yeah.
They have families too.
they're PFP with children. But I thought this was a pretty interesting dichotomy because for the core DAO, you kind of want them to be commoditized contributors. You want anyone can just hop in and just do the job and be done with it. But for the individual SubDAOs, you want them to be highly motivated and highly talented and non-commoditized, high-talented, high-performant individuals to do that. I think this is a pretty radical change in the DAO dynamics that I haven't seen play out yet, where you want the core to have commoditized workforce, whereas the SubDAOs to have really high-talent performers.
So actually, it's not necessarily. I mean, most of the time, SubDAOs are probably the same. I mean, if you're just trying to do some basic action in a SubDAO, you're not necessarily. I mean, generally, it's just never a good idea for a DAO to be in a situation where they've got all their eggs in one basket and they're relying on just a single contributor. But it's more. I mean, even if the marketplace is more liquid and there are multiple contributors you can deal with. People can still likely get, I mean, there's still a thing that you can get paid in tokens, right? Because, I mean, if you think that you're a good developer and you're doing a good job and you're going to create value for a SubDAO, then it's cool to get paid in tokens, right? And if you're getting paid in tokens and the tokens are locked for like a year or something, that's going to result in some alignment engineering where like you're going to be interested in actually making sure the thing you build is going to generate some value over the next year, so your tokens will be valuable. From then. But yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, I would really, my hope is absolutely that we just move away from this concept of like elite guru, main character, team members in DAOs, because it's simply, I mean, it works in the real world in a way, I mean, because there's accountability, right? Because there's fiduciary duty. So like you can't abuse that kind of position in the real world in the same way you can in a DAO. Like in a DAO, it's just so easy to abuse something like that. And we've seen it just over and over again, right? So basically, yeah, in the long run, I don't really think you can, I mean, it's healthy or safe really to have a lot of that dynamic. I mean, if you're going to have something like that, then what it should be is it should be on the community side, on the governance side, right? That you've got token holders that have a lot of tokens and that are very vocal and care a lot about the SubDAO and so on, right? But then then they should just be token holders, right? Like as soon as you're getting paid, then you've got to be very careful about basically the political dynamics and the conflict of interest and all this stuff that's in play, right? That basically means that there needs to be some kind of defense mechanism against, very powerful, well-connected, deeply embedded contributors that are, again, sitting with the money funnel, right, that they can turn on and then out comes some money, right?
If I had to rephrase what you're saying, the main problem with DAOs now is that contributors are also politicians. And because they're also politicians, they control the tap. And they are obviously self-interested actors. What you're trying to do is basically separate the contributor from the politics, bring the politics back to where it belongs with the token holders, and put the contributors back to where their focus should be, which is contributing and being high performant for the DAO. And oftentimes you see contributors aren't the best politicians, and politicians aren't the best contributors. So there's a way to separate the two. But at the same time, if the contributor is, gaining tokens and gaining power, how do you make sure that, the separation, like the wall between contributor and politician in politics stays separate between the two?
Yeah, so of course it's unfortunate. I mean, it's not as simple as you put it, right? I mean, because of course contributors will always have to be politicians, and it's just unfortunately the world isn't as simple as so it's always going to be a mess, right? But hopefully it will be less of a mess with proper alignment engineering.
Less of a mess,
less of a mess, right? I mean, humans are just messy, and you just gotta accept that. But this basic thing you're talking about here, right? Of like, how do you protect against basic conflict of interest? And then again, I mean, essentially the answer is alignment engineering. And so in Maker and SubDAOs, I mean, this is something we're really putting a major emphasis on, like really a lot of these like edge cases, like of how things can sort of spin out of control. The basic idea is that there are these essentially like fundamental rules that just supersede everything else, that you can't even like vote. Like, it doesn't matter if you have a majority of tokens. There are certain rules you cannot break. And some basic stuff related to that would be something like, I mean, if you're a contributor and you're getting paid, you cannot vote for the proposal that, I mean, you got to completely abstain and stay the hell out of any kind of decision related to paying yourself, right? And if you're found to do it anyway, or if you like are sneakily doing it somehow, or there's just any kind of like evidence that you're doing some shady stuff and you're getting paid, it doesn't matter. I mean, you'll get sort of blacklisted by the system, right? You'll be like, designated as what I call misaligned, right? Like, essentially, there's now clear indication that you're dangerous to the system, right? If you do something like that, and the system needs, and I mean, so this dynamic is a big problem in DAOs today, because what happens today if a DAO sort of catches somebody being dangerous, essentially, right, and sort of showing signs of actually being willing to do like bad stuff for their own benefit, because you can't do anything about it, you're screwed anyway. Like, token holders are totally, neutered, right? They can't do anything in a DAO, right? As a result, you get this like Stockholm syndrome kind of thing where people just make excuses for it and sort of hide it, essentially, like look away and like, say something like, recommend no more news like this, right? Let's just pretend it's not happening, so the bad news doesn't come out, so we benefit the price or whatever, right?
For the sake of our industry.
And what it should be is the opposite, right? It should be like, there should be this very clear protocol of like, which I often refer to as the immune system, right? That anytime something that is dangerous to the DAO, to the system, I mean, the regular person, sort of the retail token holder, should really have the capability to identify this kind of behavior and actually take forceful action against it, right? Where the kind of the facts, like the evidence itself, is what matters. And it doesn't matter if you got a bunch of tokens. If the evidence, if you, voted for your own compensation, then you just, you're done. I mean, I guess you can't get to the point where you take people's tokens, right? So there's a whole, unfortunately, and this is the thing, right? It's not simple, because there's a whole extra layer to this where anything any tool you create to try to make things better, right? To like fix the problems and like to basically like to use it to essentially, mitigate bad actors. Those tools themselves can of course also be used and wielded by the bad actors, right? So yeah, it's a balance as well, right? But essentially you want to, this basic thing of like, you want to ban and really like strike down and cut off contributors doing obvious conflict of interest. I guess that's a very simple one, right? And yeah, then from there, you just go from there. You just try to make as many rules as possible, right? So you want to sort of have these kind of rules in advance, so that when the time comes, it's like, here are the facts, here are the rules. What are we? Is it right or is it wrong? That's that should be determined as objectively as possible. and it shouldn't matter if the person who did it are well connected to a bunch of Twitter influencers or something, or if they have a bunch of tokens or whatever, right? Like the fundamental question is, it's minority token holder protection, right? It's something that looks like that plays the role of like the fiduciary duty and like the investor protections that exist in the real world, right? You need to try to emulate that in a DAO.
Yeah, and this doesn't just count for contributors, but also, you know, people farming as well and people participating in the system. You mentioned in a previous interview how you can farm the new Gov token when that comes out, but if you farm it and you dump it, you're not allowed to go into the risk-free rate of the new stable. Is that correct? And is that like the same kind of thinking you're having here?
Yeah, well, yeah, so that's just a really basic way that SubDAO token farming works, right? So it's mutually exclusive. So like if you're farming one SubDAO, then you can't farm another one. And if you're farming any SubDAO, you can't get the DAI savings rate. So I think what you're referring to is some kind of like, yeah, and also I saw this from your questions, right? So actually it's simpler than you think. Like it's like the system simply is fully designed to handle the scenario where people are farming the SubDAO tokens and selling them. Like that's like that's supposed to happen. That's a feature of the system. And the reason why that's totally fine and that's not gonna like rip off the system and make it bleed out all the money and lose all the money is because when you farm the SubDAO token, you're not getting the actual cash yield of your DAI stablecoin, right? Instead, that cash yield essentially goes to yeah, I mean, you could say essentially that cash yield makes up for the tokens that are being dumped, right? So you could also think of it as when you farm a SubDAO token, you're just getting a cash yield and using that to buy a token, which is, I mean, it's not exactly what's happening, but it's a way to think about it, to understand why it's economically sustainable and why it's sort of possible to scale up and you don't have to like, you know, you can assume the worst from humans basically, and then the worst case scenario of what happens with this setup is basically that the SubDAOs just kind of don't really do anything. Like they're just like wrappers around cash anyway, and it's just all the same basic business model of a stablecoin delivered in different, I guess you could say, color schemes or something like that. But underneath, it's all the same thing. But if we're lucky, there is something more, right? There is some ability to achieve alignment, you know, in new and interesting communities that can create this kind of community spirit, right? That can sort of generate what we call intangible value, right? That despite the fact that it's all just the same money, it's all the same business model, there's no, I mean, you know, until some real work is happening or real work is getting done or real products are being created, you can't create value out of nothing. But just getting the right people together in the right place and applying some basic alignment engineering to them, that can actually at least set the stage for the future creation of real value, right? And then that's what we call intangible value. And that's what you see with something. I mean, I would, you know, something like Bitcoin is a really crazy example of intangible value, right? That like, there's actually no, like the value isn't really real, but the value exists because you got all the right people in the right place, basically, you know, at a epically huge scale worldwide, right? And then that results in Bitcoin actually having real value, and you know, and that all grows out of, you could say, the community and the network of the people involved.
Yeah, and talking about spirit and intangible value and just, you know, having everybody in the right place at the right time, DeFi Summer was definitely one of those moments in the history of crypto. And I was going to ask you, what was so magical about DeFi Summer in your opinion, and how has that magic influenced the development of SubDAOs?
Yeah, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, right? That this is basically the blueprint for how we're designing SubDAO token farming, essentially, right? So the goal is basically to try to create a DeFi summer that never ends and that doesn't blow up, because that was kind of the problem with DeFi summer, right? That yeah, I mean, the problem was that like the industry discovered this new amazing primitive or new amazing idea, which is you can make yield more fun, right? You can gamify yield. You can gamify I don't know, you can gamify banking, right? You gamify savings, this sort of, so it's just, I mean, it's fun, right? Like people would do it because they were kind of emotionally compelled to do it because it looked cool and it was something new and there was like a reward, you know. And then the problem was that it's such a tempting proposition to then take that power and use it for bad, right? Use it for evil by using it for like a Ponzi scheme or something, right? So the problem with DeFi Summit was the yields were crazy high, which is just you can't do that. Like that is against the laws of financial gravity, right? Somebody's got to pay for that crazy high yield, and then that ended up being those who thought they were getting it most of the time, right? They were the ones who were paying for it ultimately. And then you do that enough times, and it ends, right? It's over. You've fleeced as many people as you can fleece, and nobody's going to fall for it anymore. So with SubDAOs and with SubDAO farming, what we want to create is we want to kind of try to recreate the fun without the unsustainably high yields, right? So when you farm a SubDAO, the goal is that it shouldn't have like crazy outrageous yield, because that's impossible. It can at best have like a bit higher yield than cash yield, because you're getting something that's volatile. So just through like sort of like natural financial equilibrium, people will, sort of a rational actor will accept a lower stable yield than they'll take a volatile yield, right? So the yield, so the SubDAO token yields will probably be like slightly higher than what you can get in the general rates environment. But that's not really the main driver for why somebody would be farming a SubDAO. The main thing would be it's like a question of identity or something like that, right? It's like I'm farming the SubDAO because I'm totally into Japanese culture, right? That's one of the SubDAOs actually we're experimenting with. That is the most experimental in this sense, right? That we're saying, look, let's try to make like a Japanese SubDAO and see if that gets people excited, right? But certainly the Japanese crypto community are pretty sold on this, right? So probably you'd have a lot of Japanese crypto users trying to figure out how to use DeFi, how to use DAI, how to farm this SubDAO, because it's not about they're financially optimizing and being rational and sitting with like spreadsheets and calculators and figuring it all out, right, to try to get some extra percentage yields, right? It's an emotional decision, right? That it's actually fun. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of possibilities and so on, right? And that's what drives people to actually do it and get into it. And I ultimately think that that's in the end, that's what we can offer with crypto for the most part to the real world. Like, most people don't care. Like nobody cares about decentralization, right? Everybody who cares about it, they're already deep in crypto long ago, right? Absolutely nobody out there cares at all, right? So it's a total non-starter if you want to get people into crypto, right? And like nobody cares about like lower fees and like, the reality is it's so difficult and mentally costly, and like people have limited time, and nobody wants to hurt their brain to save some fees or whatever, the thing that people like nerds in crypto think this is what the people want, right? Like if you want to get people into crypto, you gotta actually sort of hit their weak spot, right? You gotta give them some kind of real reason for why they should want to do it. That isn't just you telling them what they should want, right? You got to figure out what they actually want. And so again, the SubDAOs, because we can have so many of them, they can all differentiate, and they can try to basically target different vibes, right? Different brands, different cultures, and see if there's an interest in people to be like, DAO tokens means that I can actually connect with and collaborate with and synergize with other people that are similar to me, and we can do all sorts of cool stuff that in a type of organization that's never been possible before. That's the kind of way I think you gotta look at to try to onboard people into DeFi.
Got it. Rune, I just want to take it back to MakerDAO itself and how it plans to approach the SubDAO model. I see that in the MakerDAO Discord, there are a pretty long list of core units, such as the data insights, the growth, Oracle risk, and all of these core units. Are they going to remain in the core DAO, or do you see them also spinning off into SubDAOs as well?
Yeah, so actually the core units, almost all of them have actually already essentially been restructured into what we now call projects. So the core unit model, I mean, so that it's actually just like outdated that you got a list of core units. But on the other hand, I mean, mostly the new projects, which are basically sort of work streams run by companies. The companies who run these projects mostly are just the old core units for now, right? And the projects themselves are still not very well managed in the sense that they're not, well scoped out, right? So it's still not very clear what anybody's doing, and to a large extent, like a lot of the work is done on like a reputational basis, right? That this team has been doing this forever and it didn't fall apart, so we'll just keep paying them to do it, right? But that all needs to change. So like, I mean, I was talking about that earlier, right? That simply is not going to fly for SubDAOs. Then they'll just be tragic, be a disaster too, and super frustrating if SubDAOs are like, again, like, money funnels that dump money into a black hole and you hope for the best, right? That's going to create a lot of very bad stories, right, of people that will be burned by this approach. So we need to completely overhaul the workforce into one where all of the projects are being done, like they're not exclusive to a specific company. They are being done by whichever company is the best fit for doing that project. And what the project aims to achieve and the resources it's going to cost to get there, that needs to be very, very clearly spelled out and very transparent. The problem is that is simply not easy. And it's a huge bureaucratic and administrative burden to scope out all these requirements, right? And write it down and get people to understand what it means and then verify it after the fact. So there's a lot of additional overhead that will need to be added to get this done. But the flip side is you can also then save a lot of bloat. Like this also means now you're going to eliminate a lot of work that is essentially being done for no reason, right? By people that are just getting free money and then they just start like digging holes kind of, right? Like they just do whatever it takes and they'll just take the money and there's no control of whether that money and those resources and that work is actually going towards anything meaningful for the DAO, right? And that's that's the upside of adding all of this extra overhead to all the projects and all the funding that's happening.
Yeah, talking about the rules of SubDAOs and making sure everyone's aligned, how do you prevent yourself from creating too many rules and creating friction in the process?
I guess you could generalize this question to something like, why is the endgame plan so complicated, right? Or like, why is there so many rules and so much stuff, right? And so basically, the answer is basically that the entire design of the plan is based around having a theoretical answer to every obvious theoretical problem that exists. So you can try to create some like an equilibrium that is maintained through alignment engineering that isn't going to fall apart. So the answer is that there's as few roles as there can be without it falling apart in some, like without making it possible to construct a sort of a theoretical argument for how it's going to fail, right? So something like why are there both delegates and voter committees, which is, it doesn't even matter. It's like it's like a bureaucratic thing that nobody has to care about, but there are like two types of actors that exist to have different responsibilities at sort of the different end of, I don't know, call it like a kind of just like a kind of a power spectrum where one type of actor has very, very strong formal power, but then doesn't have a lot of discretionary day-to-day power. And then on the other end, you got someone that sort of runs the day-to-day, but then it doesn't have a very significant kind of actual sort of formal power, right? And then these two you like what you achieve by having multiple roles like this is you achieve separation of powers, right? And that is a very solid model to try to reduce basically a kind of death spiral, you could think of it, right? Where you get this like consolidation of power all into one, right? And it's actually classic logic from democracies, right? That you want separation of powers. You got you know the drill, right? You have all these like proven models in the real world, and I mean a lot of it is taking inspiration from that, but then also applying it to sort of very specific theoretical scenarios of how things can go wrong and how things can fail. And a key part again of the system is this thing: you want to write everything down. So I was talking about that earlier, right? You want to have these like scenarios, like what happens in this situation, what happens in that situation. So it's also that every single role that exists needs to have this very rich data describing what it's supposed to do in all these different scenarios, right? And then kind of, and then where you get with all this basic infrastructure then is now you get a system that's gonna not just fall over and die like kind of every DAO, every single DAO that exists today. Yeah. The reason why it doesn't fall over and die is because there's some kind of clique at the inside a clique that's keeping it alive, right? But basically without that, it simply cannot really survive on its own, right? And this system then attempts to basically create an equilibrium where that's not going to happen because you've got all these very carefully designed roles keeping each other in check, basically. Then on top of that, you can have each SubDAO, for instance. Then they can invent all sorts of like additional roles, like contributors that do different stuff or whatever. And then, but the basic sort of low level governance process will remain the same, right? Of like you've got this basic separation of powers around how do you propose ideas and how do you decide on ideas and then how do you execute them.
Yeah, and speaking of one of the first SubDAOs, Sakura DAO, I have to ask, what is the inspiration for it? Because I'm not sure if you're familiar, but this shirt is basically my brand. Whenever I go to conferences, people recognize me from Arizona. I actually have an Arizona tattoo. And I'm just like wondering, did I like have any inspiration on that? Like, or did you know about this before? Because when I saw Sakura DAO, I'm like, whoa, like this is like literally me. And Sakura DAO kind of reminds me of Flywheel a bit in terms of like both like the community aspects, like Sakura, the community aspect of Maker and Endgame, and then Flywheel, the community aspect of Frax.
Yeah, I mean, I saw you were wearing the Sakura shirt, but so actually, I didn't. It's what do you call it? Convergent evolution. But I can tell you a story, right? So a key thing of a key driver of like SubDAOs and how we got excited about it. From the start. I mean, it's been many years now, right? Since we started talking about it, right? And so a key thing is that during the last crypto bubble, Maker sort of disappeared, right? And everybody forgot about Maker. And a big reason is because the Maker community is very boring, essentially. It's like very conservative, and it was kind of designed to be like that, right? It was seeded in that way. People took it very seriously, like, in fact, too seriously, right? So you've got a lot of drama because everybody thinks it's so freaking serious. So they are sort of struggling over power and control over something that actually isn't as big as they think, but they just sort of in our heads, it just became so big and important even before whatever, right? And the point is that ended up then, I mean, it became sort of a self-destructive prophecy in a sense, where this boring, self-important, sort of arrogant vibe in the community meant it couldn't grow, right? Because that's nobody wants to go there when they're so freaking boomer and boring, right? And then everybody went to the Ponzi's instead and got burned, right? And then they just left, right? Those people, right? So we just lost a lot of people that could have been in crypto if Maker hadn't been so freaking boring and self-righteous, right? If instead we had actually been able to appeal to the new generation of people in crypto, right? That want something a little bit more fun than pretending to be central bankers, right? Anyway, but the problem is we just don't have that. I mean, we've had a really hard time with that in Maker because it's just not in our blood. Like Maker is just, we've always been boring, and we sort of we always in the early days of Maker we would like talk about how, yeah, Maker has succeeded when it's boring. That's what it's all about. Like it should just be like stable, reliable, and then that should be it, right? That's the goal. But it turns out no, you got to figure out how to do growth as well, right? And so anyway, so the SubDAOs is like, I mean, so because that's not really possible in the core DAO, and it is also dangerous, right? To have like a fun DAO managing billions of dollars, right? And then let's do a little fun little thing, and then whoops, all the money's gone, right? That's of course completely out of the question, right? You can't have anything like that, right? But with the SubDAOs, suddenly the doors open to let's kind of segregate away the risk, right? So if a community wants to be more casual and fun and so on, I mean, it's not going to be able to somehow damage the very critical core function of the system,
right? Sandbox.
Okay, and so we're always talking about that, and we always talk about we have the spectrum of SubDAOs that there'll be on one hand there'll be this like banker SubDAO, right? That's all about like real world assets and legal stuff, and the really kind of like taking the boring to the next, even like making it even like corporate, right? And just go all in on that kind of stuff, because that's great. A lot of people love that, right? That's what they like about crypto, is it has a lot of it has a lot of use cases in it for institutions and TradFi and so on, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, we had this thing we always called it the Doge DAO, right? So we're looking at like Dogecoin. That's like, what if Maker could be like Dogecoin, and you could attract people and get them excited and having fun like Dogecoin, right? But instead of being a useless meme coin, it's a real product, right? So that was like this archetype of like, let's have a SubDAO that's just all about really being really fun and spreading memes and so on. But the thing is, like something like Doge is too extreme. Like that could not realistically be pulled off by Maker, because we're simply not that fun, So that's like that would be going too far, right? So then, because basically we have this sort of pivot towards Asia, right? This major focus in Asia because of the good regulatory environment in Japan and Korea and Singapore and other places in Asia. We basically just got inspired to like realize that Japan has this very unique global brand, that it's one of the, it's something really interesting about Japan that is I mean, I explained it through some memes when I first announced Sakura DAO, right? That there is this like idea that stuff from Japan is just more interesting to some people. There's some people that's very attracted to it, right? There's this like sense of quality and also like quirky, very unique art and sort of artistic expression and cultural expression, right? So that's something I realized that like this is a perfect kind of a little bit more low risk attempt at creating a sort of fun SubDAO, right? Because I mean, and then there's another aspect to it, which is the regional focus element of SubDAOs, right? That SubDAOs can they're also very good at being positioned for different regions, right? So with this, we got sort of two birds with one stone, right? We both get this sort of fun, this brand. I mean, like high brand value, high signal brand thing, and a regional focus at the same time. That's the long-winded story of the theory behind it.
I read a thread somewhere on Twitter a few months ago about how Japan and the US are the two most successful at mass exporting their culture far and wide, and no other country has been able to replicate that at scale. I'll send it to you after the show, but it was by Marco Jukic. It was really interesting.
Rune, I just got a final question on my end. Was there a moment at MakerDAO or another project where you're just like, fuck all this DAO shit, I want to do a reset? Like, what was the straw that broke the camel's proverbial back that made you do this? And
the funny thing is actually it happened at the top of the so what happened in Maker was we shut down the foundation, we transitioned to the core unit model, and I was sort of out of the project actually, right? So I sort of left and stopped being very active because that's what I always wanted, right? I always wanted to spend less time on Maker. And then as I did, I just realized it was just all going terribly badly, right? So we had the core unit model was just really, really bad, basically, and especially during the bull run, because like Maker was sort of not performing, not really getting attention. So the instinct was to like spend left and right on like random crap that was somehow try to show try to catch up with all these like what turns out to all be like freaking Ponzi's, right? That weren't doing anything. But it was just so clear that, this whole thing of like the politicians and the money the money funnels and all of that, right? And the money taps and all the negative dynamics of that. And that made me actually just completely write off DAOs and crypto in general. Like I was just like, so basically at the peak of the bull market, I was like ready to just like be like, okay, this is a joke industry that doesn't work, and I'm just gonna leave. And this is like, it's a dead end. Nothing's gonna, I was totally done with it basically.
Totally black-pilled.
Yeah. I was like, I was ready to go. But then I realized I couldn't freaking leave because, I was the only major voter in Maker, right? So it's like the curse of voter appetite. I mean, the problem itself, it meant that actually I couldn't really sell my tokens because as I started selling them, they would become worthless, right? Like I'd only be able to sell a small amount, and then they would just like I would risk the whole thing going to zero, right? So basically, I realized I had no choice. I had to like fix it. But yeah, I mean, turns out it was lucky because
which
I think
Ponzi was it?
Yeah, which one?
Which Ponzi broke the
What do you mean?
camel's
Which
back?
Ponzi?
Like which Ponzi when you saw and you're just like, okay, all this shit is a scam. It's over. I'm leaving.
Well, I mean, they're all fucking Ponzis. There's nothing that wasn't a freaking Ponzi.
It's all pasta.
I mean, it's totally insane, right? It's like if you look at what exists now on the other side of the bubble, it's the same as what existed before the bubble. It's like DeFi 1.0, right? There's like Maker and Aave and Uniswap and like a few other usual suspects. Absolutely nothing of what came during the bubble was survived, right? It was like the whole thing was a giant scam, basically. Like it rightfully made people say crypto is just a scam because it was everything people got exposed to was a scam. Like there was nothing real at all whatsoever. Even like freaking NFTs. I mean, they're all freaking scams, I think, right? I mean, some of them were like legit, but like all like you just see it over and over again. It's just, I mean,
it's like we're getting new collection, new NFTs, this and that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tragic, right? Because the thing is that the technology blockchain technology can really do so much good. In fact, it really can be. I mean, it is as transformative as something like AI, I think, right? And it's really gonna change the world for the better. But it's because it's so crazy powerful. Because what it does is it disrupts money, right? And it disrupts value and capitalism. And then because it's too powerful, like it's like raw power. And then what happens is the people who get attracted to that are like bad people, basically, right?
It's like dynamite. It can be used for good.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just but it's like it's so much more easy to use it for bad, right? So what happens is 99% of it is all scams and bad stuff, and most people in crypto are bad people. Like there's so many freaking bad people in this industry. Like it's incomparable to anything else I've worked with. Like it's it's like a total joke, right? But the thing, I mean, I'm hoping that also like kind of people can grow up a bit, right, and learn from this reality that, look, I mean, if you're going to be a sheep and going to let yourself get scammed, then you're in this new world. I mean, with crypto and now with, I don't know, freaking AI and deep fakes and so on, right? You just humanity will have to adapt to the fact that scamming is now such a weaponized, streamlined, optimized thing, right? That there's going to be no escape. So, I mean, that's going to have to happen. And then you've got to have things like Maker and SubDAOs and everybody else that are doing legit things in crypto need to freaking get out of their seat and actually figure out how to appeal to users, right? Yeah. Instead of like resting on the laurels in the corner and then let all the users get fleeced by the scammers.
And speaking of projects that have made it through the bull and are, building during the bear and, attracting real use and users, I want to turn to Frax a bit because recently you had lunch with Sam K and it sounded like you guys really bonded and hit it off. And I'm just like wondering, what are your thoughts on Frax and what are your thoughts of it in evolving over, the past bull and into the current market?
Yes, I've been talking to Sam from Frax for a long. I mean, so he was one of the people I talked to originally about Endgame and SubDAOs and so on because, I was like trying to seek out, some of some people of this new generation that understood the new mathematics of the bull run or whatever, right? And
the new paradigm.
Yeah, but So and I think it's really smart, right? In Maker, we had sort of our own version of this fundamental idea of Frax, which is that you want to combine all the top business models and sort of, for us, it's like, it's like governance is the hard part. So like, if you can figure that out, there's a lot of things you can do with it, right? Which is it's a bit similar to this idea, right? That Sam always says, all roads lead to Frax, right? Which we're somewhat seeing. We're seeing it play out now with like a bunch of projects starting stablecoins, right? Which I basically agree with, and I think that's the right thing to do. The comment I have about Frax is like as this is also something Sam continuously talks about, right? That the problem with the challenge for the project right now is that it's under collateralized, right? So it's like it's still an algorithmic stablecoin basically, and it needs to you can't count on a bull run coming back and saving the day. So the project needs to itself re-collateralize. Luckily it's not like we're not. It does have real assets, but it's really like that's the $1 billion question for Frax, right? Like that needs to be the top priority for everything. And I think if that can be successfully achieved, I think that will require this intangible value, right? That's not, like in the traditional world, it's not possible to like be insolvent and then coming back from the brink. That doesn't happen in real life, right? Like that's maybe possible in crypto because of basically the value of community and the value of tokens and if you look at meme coins and Dogecoin or whatever and Bitcoin, right? Like there is this very real, very significant value that exists in communities and having the right people together. So, so if that is if Frax achieves that, if it survives in the long run, that's going to be a huge testament to that. Basically the power of intangible value, right? And this new thing that we have to basically play with in crypto, right? That really sets us apart from traditional finance.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of Flywheel, could you see Flywheel, like what we're doing here at Flywheel, becoming a SubDAO or something similar to Flywheel becoming a SubDAO in the future?
So the way SubDAOs work in Maker, right? And I really believe that this is the right model. Like, so I'm hoping that once, like nobody, of course, at this stage, nobody understands how we're doing SubDAOs. It's like there's too many things to try to understand with Maker already, and then there's like Endgame and SubDAOs on top of that. So it's very hard to like for anybody to know, or even if you're told the details, to remember them, right? But once you see it in action, I think it will change the game and it will become like the new meta, hopefully, because I think it's so much better than how DAOs and are treated today, right? So. The thing about Maker SubDAOs is nobody becomes a SubDAO, and nothing existing defines a new SubDAO, right? Instead, it's like SubDAOs are just total blank slates. So they're like created from nothing by Maker algorithmically, right? So it's like there's not even a human that, or even a governance decision or something that creates a SubDAO. It is just sort of created periodically based on an algorithm. And then the tokens are farmed out, 100% fair launch, right? Like the only way to obtain the tokens, the genesis distribution of the tokens, is through farming. And then the people who farm it, they then decide what to do, basically, right? So that means everybody's got a fair shot, like, and all of these existing, these initial SubDAOs, like Sakura, right, which is Japan focused, or Spark, which is this, deep DeFi and deep tech focused SubDAO. Like they have a kind of an angle and a brand and stuff already. But the reality is, if enough people farm the tokens, they can just override all that and be like, nope, we're going to do something else instead, right? And there's already this sort of dynamic happening where, because we created Sakura DAO, right, and was like, look, we'll have a SubDAO that is like Japan focused. Then the Korean community were like, well, we're gonna make Spark into the Korean SubDAO. So there's this sort of the kind of emergent behavior, right? Of like that the Korean community is already now being like, okay, well, we're going to organize, so everybody's going to farm the Spark SubDAO, so that we make sure that we can make it, have it be heavily like aligned with Korea and maybe have governance available in Korean and products in Korean and so on.
So are SubDAOs 100% fair launch? Is there any allocation to the core DAO of tokens, or is it just 100% distributed at Genesis?
Yeah, they're actually much deeper linked than through allocation to tokens. So it's literally, so the core DAO forever has the ability, forever will just always emit more SubDAO tokens. So that's something that's, I guess, it's more valuable than owning tokens, is owning the ability to forever print more tokens, right? But in return, SubDAOs always as well forever receive emissions from Maker Core as well. So it's this very deeply linked dynamic, right? That SubDAOs really are never, like, they're always intertwined with Maker no matter what.
Oh, so Maker can mint new SubDAO tokens and
it's not a governance decision. It's fully, it's totally automatic. Nobody's able to change the parameters whatsoever, right? It's just forever. Every SubDAO is always emitting new tokens that go towards token farming with the common stablecoin.
Oh, okay. I got it.
So how does the SubDAO build a small enough treasury or a budget to manage expenses and everything like that if it's just emitted via emissions?
Yeah, so that's because it gets a subsidy from Maker Core. So initially, every SubDAO it's like the equivalent of 3,333 MKR per year.
I saw that for Sakura. Yeah, I see.
Yeah. So that's the case for all of them, and then that's like no, so that's just permanent. So every single year, they just get MKR tokens. And that's like their baseline income, you could say, right? So that does change. There's a bunch of phases of endgame, right? So this 3,333 MKR equivalent, that is like a temporary initial parameter, and it then changes to something that's more complicated, basically when the full endgame is activated. Because basically the initial mechanism is relatively simple, and the end state mechanism is very, very advanced, because it needs to be able to handle the creation of new SubDAOs continuously, which then requires all the parameters to be a lot more dynamic.
So there's an equilibrium.
And maybe something I should also mention now that we're talking about is that so the very first phase before even the launch of SubDAOs is also the rebrand of Maker, right? So we'll have so MKR and DAI will stick around as tokens, but the project overall will basically rebrand, and it'll have two new tokens that currently are referred to as New Stable and New Gov token. And then, they'll get a real brand when basically the contributors are done developing it, right? With some big fancy brand agencies, right? So we're really trying hard to make the project more appealing.
Any hints of like what the brand is? Like, you give like any clues?
No, but but mainly, the goal is to make it more simple and appealing to regular people, right? It really is. We want to try to drive more people into crypto, right? And think about how to make it. Yeah, something like DAI and MKR, and so many projects in crypto are so like focused on doing stuff for crypto, right? They look at what are people in crypto already doing, and then they try to deliver to that. And that is actually the right way for like most people who are building in crypto. That's what they should be doing, because that's where they can realistically try to reach a market, right? But something like Maker has already, we've already sort of saturated that market, right? And we actually have the capability to try to go beyond. And if you look at like the ones that have really sort of branched out and are actually have sort of, you could say, non-crypto users, that's USDC and USDT, right? And I mean, their whole thing is they got USD in the name of the token, and then people understand it. And unfortunately, we don't think we can do that. That's too risky. I mean, it's too risky for us basically to try to call something that ultimately isn't, directly a USD equivalent. You shouldn't call something like that USD directly, but you can sort of make it more. You can just try to make the brain more simple and freaking die at least, right? Which is not exactly very, it's a very insider, right? Like very, I don't know what to call it, right? Yeah, it's total. I mean, it's an arbitrary name, right? And then we wanted more straightforward and so
consumer friendly,
family
friendly.
But then the thing is, it's more friendly, right? It's gotta be friendly. And also we want the brand for the DAO to be the same as the stablecoin, right? So you'd want something like Maker Dollar and MakerDAO, right? Instead of two completely separate tokens. And then the DAO token, and this is also the really big one, right? Is then gonna be redenominated. So like one MKR will become 12,000 of these new Gov token. Which is, I mean, and that's a really big one also in terms of just trying to make it actually appealing and inviting to like regular people. Because like the low supply of MKR was actually, believe it or not, it was deliberately chosen to push to push people away and gatekeep people to not hold the token. Because we thought we were a bunch of like geniuses who were like going to sit in an ivory tower and like, oh, we only want people who want to role play central bankers to hold this token, right? So, I mean, and that's great, so yeah, it did absolutely create this very, you could say sophisticated elite community with people that are actually, with not too much noise, right? But the downside was then it meant that everybody, nobody cared about it when the big bubble happened, and then everybody got fleeced by the scams, right? And Luna or whatever, because we just couldn't appeal at all because, I mean, everything was set up to keep people out, right? Which is kind of dumb. So the new system basically, the new brand, the new setup is very much like, the system is extremely solid and super theoretical, right? And absolutely crazy complex under the hood. But as a normal person who are interested in it, you shouldn't have to know all that stuff, right? It should actually be possible for something like that to feel simple and be fun. And kind of like, one of the ways we think of it as like, if you start playing out World of Warcraft or something, right, then that game is stupidly complex, right? There's like 10 trillion things. But if you're like playing it from the beginning, it's fine because it's not all like in your face all at once from the beginning. You have a kind of a path you can go down, right? And if you don't want to go to all the crazy stuff, you don't have to, right? You can stay with the simple, fun stuff, right? And that's how a DAO and a DeFi ecosystem should be, right? That really... mostly it should be appealing to regular people and be really simple, and you shouldn't expect people to go much deeper than that, right? I mean, nobody cares for the most part, right? If you do care, it should also be easy to go deeper down the rabbit hole, right? But it shouldn't be presented as like, if you're not willing to like go all the way and commit your life to this, club of nerds, then you're not welcome, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's a really unproductive way to try to actually to build a community, because that's another thing. I mean, the final thing is really like DAOs just always benefit from being big. It's all about scale, right? So that's a big problem with this attitude of like, let's gatekeep who can be in the community. Let's keep away the bad apples and only get the good people, because you're also going to keep away a lot of good apples. And now you have a smaller community, and that's going to make you more weak. And really, it's all about scaling.
Yeah. One final question on my end, and then I think we're going to wrap up. So when Endgame is all said and done, let's say it's complete and it's, went beyond expectation. It's, ideal world. What does the Endgame world look like?
Well, so it really is, it's sort of all the stuff we talked about, right? I mean, I think obviously there's a bunch of technical features like SubDAOs and some fancy staking mechanics. And then there's like the new chain, we call it, right? The whole thing will run on its own. Yeah. the whole thing will run on its own like dedicated blockchain to sort of run the back end of all of this. So it's very, very efficient, very advanced tokenomics and tokens, and that are then bridged out to Ethereum and other major blockchains. So as an end user, you don't notice any difference, right? It's just more effective and more efficient or whatever. But it's not going to change how it, like adding an extra. The right way to do blockchains is that you shouldn't care about where the blockchain is or whatever. And if you want to do something on a particular blockchain, it should be available there, right? But then it will just Maker itself will end up sort of sitting on this single blockchain that lets it then connect to all other blockchains, and then run its backend a very high performance and do some other stuff related to governance, security, and that nobody cares about. But the real challenge, right? So the thing is, this is all a bunch of technical stuff that actually nobody. Most people will not care or understand that, right? Like the bigger challenge that is like the bigger thing for us is, solving this problem that we were talking about with contributors, right? They're like trying to actually make it so that a DAO really is a place where that feels like if you're a person and you just want to be a part of the DAO, you can buy a token and now you're a part of it, and you're not like an outsider and you're not in the insider group. If you got some tokens, you've got some voting power, and that should make a difference. You should be able to influence the DAO, right? And you shouldn't feel like you're getting ripped off by the insider contributors, or that you have to know somebody to be able to get anything done or whatever, right? Like that would really be the ideal end state, right? That we try to achieve a new form of human organization, right? Where you have this more marginal ability to contribute and more sort of fluid, inclusive way for people to work together to create value. Because there's a lot of potential in that, right? And there's it can both fix things in like the Western world, where like the large institutions that are totally broken here can be improved through this way, right? By making them more open. But also it can be an organizing force in the developing world, right? And sort of help people like SubDAOs and the SubDAO structure and this whole possibility. Just the fact that you can show it's possible in Maker will mean that it can be replicated in other situations, right? And that's going to also maybe enable people that today don't have strong legal systems or something to then still be able to organize and get things done in a way that's not currently possible.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see it play out and see it become. It would be really cool if it does become the new meta, and then you have this new self-organizing, self-perpetuating system that's not just in Maker, but in all different types of protocols and DAOs and whatnot. With that, we are to the lightning round. So at the end of every interview, we like to say some more fun, lighter questions, like get to know you as the person behind the profile picture. But it is your profile picture. But Kit, go ahead.
So I'll always kick this off with, what was the first time you touched the blockchain? What was your virgin crypto experience? And sex doesn't count.
Probably I bought some Bitcoin in like 2011, I think.
That is early.
I think I transferred out to a wallet. Yeah, but something I've played around with Bitcoin really early on.
Nice. Second question, what is your favorite off-chain touch grass activity, hobbies and interests?
Probably like playing with my kids or something, I don't have much time. Walking the dog or playing with the kids, or I don't have real hobbies too much anymore.
What would be some advice to your younger self?
I was very much, I think a lot of people have this, well, maybe not so much nowadays, but for my generation, getting into like tech and then especially crypto, there was this sense of like tech is everything, coding is everything. And that was how I first approached startups, innovation. And And it turns out that, I mean, remember some like old wise people were like telling me this advice, like, look, the human side is just as important. In fact, it's probably more important. And I just couldn't, you always look for easy answers to complex questions. So for me, that was like, oh yeah, if you just have some good coders and good tech, then that solves everything. And that turns out to be a total disaster. And that's like that mentality set up a lot of the challenges we had in Maker that held us back, that I'm now basically finally sort of in a situation where I can attempt to overcome and solve that.
And last question for me is, if you weren't in crypto or tech, what would your professional career path be?
Game development. So I'm actually also in game development. So I love that. I love the games industry, and it's like, yeah, I think it's a lot better than crypto, So, the problem is it's very hard to, I also think, I don't think necessarily it's so easy to make it in crypto either nowadays. It's an older industry now as well. But of course, that's definitely also the case in gaming. But it's a freaking huge industry. And there's a lot of,
I used to build Roblox
a lot of
games.
cool things happening. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things happening with like Unreal 5 and a new
right.
technical solution stuff coming out.
Yeah. And one last question for me. Who do you want to see on Flywheel next? Who would you recommend as a guest?
Maybe Stani. I always recommend. He's the one I always
Stani.
recommend whenever people say, "Yeah, what else is up in crypto?" I think, yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to have.
It's hard to top it. It's hard to top it after you talk to me.
Honestly,
nice. And he's humble. Awesome.
Yeah, Rune, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you and find more stuff about Maker?
You can go to MakerDAO.com. From there, I think you'll be able to find a Discord, which is probably the best place to keep up. But honestly, it's obviously hard to keep up with Maker in the middle of this big transformation. Yeah. Then we've got at MakerDAO on Discord, and then there's at MakerDAO on Twitter, and then there's my Twitter, which is at RuneKek. So Rune KEK.
All right, guys. Rune, thank you so much for coming on. We hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Have a nice day.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the post game. I'm your host, DeFi Dave, here with Capital K, and we just concluded a very long, detailed episode going into SubDAOs with none other than Maker founder Rune Keck. We got Rune on. And
I can't believe it.
I can believe it. This really resulted in my own natural interest in SubDAOs and this idea of how all comes back to how do you organize and incentivize humans, especially in the crypto and Web3 space. And Rune is attempting to go where other people haven't gone before. Will it work out? We'll see. But if there's one thing for sure, it seems like Rune was absolutely fed up with crypto. It sounded like he was just pissed. He was pissed. He was like, it's all Ponzi's. He sounded like someone that never was in crypto, but it's all Ponzi's, blah, blah, blah. But he's Rune. He started Maker. And so it's he sounded really blackpilled, like I said on the podcast, blackpilled. And then because he's well, I have so many goddamn tokens, I'm might as well do something about it. And so now he's doing this radical experiment with SubDAOs. And instead of focusing on, as you heard, at the end of the interview, he was I thought it was all about coding and being technical. Instead of going that route, he's okay, it's more about the human element and how do we incentivize humans and get everyone excited and, creating intangible value.
Yeah. Honestly, that was my favorite question at the end, because just hearing him speak, I'm he has this angst, and what is the source of this angst? So I had to ask him, what was the Ponzi that broke the camel's back? And it was so clear. I can't believe he said all of them. And I was he really said that everything happened in DeFi summer, this whole bubble reset it, really set us back, and look who's still remaining. He really has that purest take on what crypto should be like. And like you said, dude, I hope his experimentation in DAO dynamics works out.
Yeah, and it seems like during the bull run, he's right. You didn't really hear much of Maker. You just heard of all the shiny new toys because Maker was kind of this bureaucratic monolith that moved very slow, and then that had all like the politics and whatnot in it, and like who's getting funding for what, but all this baggage and weight. Meanwhile, these new projects were very nimble and stealthy and sexy and could do things faster. And
new coin better than old coin, bro.
Yeah, new coin better than, and had all these like fancy mechanisms, but they ended up being unsustainable. And now it's interesting. Like it's like we crossed the bull market into the bear, and now like look what's remaining: 1.0 and Frax, DeFi 1.0 and Frax. I thought it was also interesting how there's this trend of founders like taking a step back from their projects to decentralize. But then the project just starts falling apart or just being in disarray.
Kane do that too?
No. Yeah. So Kane did it too. Kane like stepped back and then he went back in because like, it's kind of the same thing.
Synthetics, in case folks didn't know.
Came from Synthetics, who we also had on the pod. And then Kevin Owocki from Gitcoin.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he took a step back to, to decentralize and in the name of decentralization. And then you had Gitcoin doing all these different things and whatnot, and just like he was like, I got to step back in. So the road to decentralization is not a clean path. And I don't know if the example of a founder, quote unquote, stepping away is Satoshi from Bitcoin. That's like the one that you
and Charlie Lee.
And Charlie Lee.
Litecoin.
Oh yeah, Charlie Lee too. Maybe it's only proof of work coins that can you step back. Okay. When it's like these organizations with a mission, you can't really step back. Or like it's really a question of secession. Like how do you properly have secession in a DAO for like you don't just give it to you give it to the community, but you give it to someone to lead the community. Like this is like, or like that person steps up naturally from the community.
Mm-hmm. DAO secession plan. Yeah. No, either way, I think this is an experiment on a grand scale. I love that he's putting real dollars behind it. I knew that there was that 3333. Like, we talked about that because I was like, what, 5 million Maker at and now I'm or $5 million. And I was just like, on a per year basis, $5 million is like a massive budget for a SubDAO. And I was like, and he said he wanted a lot of SubDAOs. So I'm like, man, the core business needs to make so much profit to be able to keep on funding these SubDAO experiments. So I'm very curious to see who's working out the finances in the back end.
And what did he say? How were the SubDAOs and main DAO interlinked? Like the main DAO supports the SubDAO and the SubDAO like emits tokens to, or no, I forgot this part.
I didn't quite understand it much, except for the fact that you don't control your own supply.
Oh, you don't.
And it just gets minted forever. Like the core DAO mints infinitely prints your token.
Yeah, it has the ability, and then in return, like supports.
No, not just the ability. It is coded in, so it is inevitability that it will happen. So I'm curious to see who will be. Like, why would you want to do a SubDAO token when you could just do a completely new DAO and maybe partner with Maker and like still get to control your destiny while still being partnered with Maker? Right.
I mean, they're like required to support you though. Like, 3,333 MKR tokens. That's like almost $5 million.
It's $5 million in funding, but also they control your destiny. Because I was also thinking, like,
it's like a
what if a SubDAO grew larger than that? Like what Sam McCulloch said in our chat before this call is like, what if the SubDAO grew larger than the core DAO, and it wants to leave the core DAO? Is there a proclamation of emancipation here situation going on where they can step away?
But maybe I guess they could do something where it's like, let's dissolve the treasury and then put it into a new treasury. Like,
I don't know, right? These questions, especially if, let's say Maker's rebranding doesn't go well, and somebody came up with a cleaner, much more beautiful UI and branding that takes all the customers away, and they actually run everything, and Maker is just a hollowed shell with a beautiful tech, right?
Yeah.
And So, all these things are kind of up for debate. But either way, I love to see this experimentation at this scale.
Yeah, and Maker's just been such a pioneer in crypto. First DeFi project, one of the first DeFi projects, if not the first DeFi project, and now experimenting with governance and social dynamics. So, we'll see how it works out, Cotton.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you want to keep up with everything happening in DeFi, in DAOs, in Frax, and everything in between, you know what to do. Go to our newsletter right now at flywheeldefi.com. Sign up for all the latest updates. Make sure you hit that bell button and subscribe to our YouTube for all the latest videos. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Give us a like. Make sure you follow us on all of our socials, Twitter, Telegram, TikTok, at FlywheelDeFi, for exclusive show notes to catch up with everything what Rune said. So just go back, get a refresher. Make sure you go to FriendTech, get a key for exclusive show notes. And to follow yours truly on Twitter, it's at DeFiDay22.
And I'm at 0xcapital_K.
And we'll see you next week. Peace.
Balloons.
Everything said on this episode is not financial or tax advice. This channel is strictly for educational purposes and is not investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any assets or to make any financial decisions. This video is not tax advice whatsoever. Please talk to your accountant and do your own research.